Hey guys. Tonight we drop you somewhere you'd never volunteer for. Even if the sign-up bonus promised free meals for life. You're standing at the edge of a First World War trench. Boots already sinking. The ground breathing out a damp smell that's part earth, part rust, part something you'd rather not identify. Somewhere behind you, artillery thumps like a giant trying to turn over in its sleep. Somewhere ahead, men are waiting for dinner. And for reasons that still feel like a clerical error. That dinner is now your responsibility. You're the trench cook, not a heroic charge kind of role. More of a, keep everyone alive long enough to complain tomorrow, assignment. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week here, emotionally, nutritionally, or fashion-wise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what time it is locally. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're already moving forward, because stopping means blocking traffic in a trench that's barely wider than your shoulders. Men brush past you, coats stiff with dried mud, eyes hollow in that way people get when sleep becomes a rumor. You follow the trench line as it zigzags like a badly drawn lightning bolt. A design meant to save lives by confusing explosions. Though it mostly just confuses you. The Great War is well underway now. Millions of men dug into the earth across France and Belgium. Locked in a stalemate everyone insists will be broken any day now. That's the big historical event you've heard about, trench warfare. Endless lines, no movement, all mud and misery, but your world shrinks quickly. Your front line isn't the enemy trench. It's a battered pot, a ration crate, and a fire that refuses to cooperate. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not dramatic, cinematic cold. Just a damp chill that seeps upward, through leather and socks and into your bones. As if the ground itself is slowly winning an argument with your body. You're supposed to set up a field kitchen somewhere, safe. Which in trench logic means slightly less likely to explode. The kitchen is not a room. It's a suggestion. A patch of trench wall where someone has wedged planks. Balanced a metal stove, and decided that smoke discipline is more of a guideline than a rule. You learn fast that cooking smoke is like ringing a dinner bell for enemy artillery. Dinner and danger arrive together here. Your official supplies are underwhelming. Flour, if you're lucky. Tins of meat with labels so vague they might as well say, animal adjacent. Dried peas that could double as gravel. The army calls this a balanced ration. You call it a challenge to your imagination. A lesser-known fact that doesn't make it into the glossy histories is that trench cooks often improvised wildly. Trading favors, scavenging ingredients, even sweet-talking supply clerks just to add something, anything, different to the pot. Variety wasn't a luxury, it was morale. You start to understand quickly why the men watch you more closely than they watch the sky. A hot meal means warmth spreading through numb fingers. It means routine. It means proof that today is not the last day. You stir, trying to keep the soup from scorching. And your arm aches with the simple effort. Every sound feels amplified, the slosh of liquid, the crackle of a weak flame, the distant rumble that never quite stops. You joke, quietly, that if the war doesn't kill you, repetitive stirring injuries might. No one laughs, but someone exhales through his nose. And you count that as a win. Water becomes your obsession. Clean water. Specifically, you've been warned, by men who look like they've learned the hard way, that trench water is a betrayal waiting to happen. Contaminated by runoff, latrines, sometimes worse. Dysentery has claimed more soldiers than bullets in some units. An unglamorous truth that rarely makes it into recruitment posters. So you boil everything. You guard your kettle like it's made of gold. When the water finally bubbles, you feel a ridiculous surge of pride. This, right here, is your battlefield victory. As evening creeps in, the trench darkens, shadows filling every corner. You ladle out portions, apologizing out of habit, even though no one asked. The men eat slowly, deliberately, as if stretching the experience might make it last longer. Someone mutters that it tastes almost like home, and you know that's a lie. But it's a kind one. You file it away anyway. Encouragement is another ingredient you'll need in bulk. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of trench rations, whether they sustained soldiers adequately or merely kept them functioning at the bare minimum. Standing here, watching men scrape the bottom of their bowls, you feel the answer isn't just nutritional. Food here is psychological scaffolding, propping up minds under constant strain. Take it away, and everything collapses faster. A shell lands somewhere far enough away to be considered background noise. You flinch anyway. Everyone does. Then, almost immediately, conversation resumes. Quieter but determined. You realize this is the rhythm you'll live by. Cook. Flinch. Serve. Repeat. The war may be fought with guns and grand strategies. But down here, it's fought with spoons and patience. You rinse the pot with precious water, already thinking about tomorrow's meal, tomorrow's problems, as you settle against the trench wall, steam still rising faintly from your clothes. One thought drifts through your tired mind. You didn't fire a shot today. You didn't advance a single meter. But you fed the line. And somehow, in this strange underground world, that feels like enough, for now. You don't really sleep. You sink into a shallow pause where time loosens its grip. And then you're awake again. Because the trench has decided it's morning. There's no sunrise down here. Just a gradual lightening of the mud walls. As if the earth itself is reluctantly opening one eye. Your back aches from the way you folded yourself against the planks. And your hands already smell faintly of yesterday's soup. That smell is going to stick with you. Years from now, historians will argue about dates and tactics. But no one debates the smell of a trench kitchen once you've known it. You push yourself up and immediately nearly lose a boot. The mud has opinions about ownership. It pulls, slow and stubborn, like it's asking you to stay. Somewhere above, a flare hisses and fades, painting the trench in ghostly white for a heartbeat. Breakfast, apparently, waits for no one. Men are already lining up. Tin mugs dangling. Shoulders hunched against the cold. You notice how they hover near you, not because you're important, but because you're predictable. Guns misfire, plans fail, but if you're doing your job, there will be something warm soon. Setting up the kitchen, again, is an exercise in creative denial. You tell yourself the ground is almost level. You tell yourself the stove is stable. You tell yourself that today, surely today, the fire will behave. It does not. The wind snakes through the trench, stealing heat, flicking ash into your eyes. You mutter something under your breath that would have gotten you a stern look back home. Here, no one cares. One of the men offers a match like it's a sacred object. You accept it with a nod that feels far too solemn for a piece of wood. The historical backdrop hums along regardless. This is the era of mass armies, of industrial-scale war, of entire nations learning that modern conflict eats people faster than they can be trained. Everyone knows the big picture now. Months of stalemate. Lines barely shifting. Casualties stacking up quietly behind the headlines. What's less often mentioned is how much of that stalemate depends on logistics, on whether people like you can coax calories out of crates and into bodies. A strange truth circulates among the older soldiers. An army marches on its stomach. But in the trenches, it mostly squats and complains. Breakfast is thin porridge today. Officially, it's nourishing. In practice, it's a warm reminder that chewing is optional. You stir slowly, partly to keep it from burning, partly because there's something calming about the motion, like you're turning the world at a manageable speed. Someone cracks a joke about this being a detox cleanse, and you file that under jokes that only make sense if you don't think about them too hard. You add a pinch of salt, feeling reckless. As you serve, you notice small rituals forming. One man always waits until last. Another blows on his spoon exactly 3 times. A third stares into the mug as if it might reveal his future. You don't comment. These habits are load-bearing now. There's a lesser-known fact whispered around the lines. Routines, even pointless ones, significantly reduced shell shock symptoms. Though no one had a proper name for that yet. They just knew that without habits, minds unraveled faster. A runner passes through with news from somewhere else, an attack postponed. Or maybe advanced. It's hard to tell. The information feels abstract, like hearing about weather in a country you'll never visit. What matters is whether the men have eaten. You watch shoulders loosen slightly as the porridge goes down. It's not joy. It's not even satisfaction. It's the absence of hunger. And here, that counts as luxury. Water again becomes your quiet battle. The supply cart hasn't come through yet, and your reserves are low. You make the call to thin the porridge more than planned, telling yourself it's still edible. Historians still debate whether trench cooks deliberately diluted meals to stretch supplies or whether shortages forced their hand. Standing here, you know the answer can be both. You feel a flicker of guilt anyway, which is absurd, given the circumstances. But guilt is another thing that thrives in damp places. Mid-morning, the shelling picks up, not close enough to stop you working, but close enough to remind you that your stove is not invisible. You keep one ear tuned, learning the language of incoming fire. Whistle, pause, thud, whistle, pause, thud. You joke to yourself that it's like cooking to a metronome set by someone who hates you. Humor is thin, but it's still something. When the last mug is filled, you scrape the pot, disappointed by how little is left. Someone asks if there's more. Already knowing the answer, you shake your head. There's no anger in their faces. Just resignation. That's when it hits you. Disappointment here is quieter than you expected. Louder emotions cost too much energy. You clean up slowly, hands numb, mind drifting. You think about kitchens you've known, real ones, with walls and windows and the radical concept of chairs. You wonder if you'll ever complain about a meal again. Historians still argue about when soldiers truly became disillusioned with the war. You suspect it wasn't during a grand battle, but during moments like this, staring into an empty pot, realizing how small comfort has become. By the time you sit down again, the trench has settled into its daytime rhythm. Rifles crack in the distance. Someone hums tunelessly. You lean your head back against the wall, eyes half closed, already planning lunch. Not because you're hopeful, because planning is how you stay human. Lunch creeps up on you without asking permission. Time in the trench doesn't move forward so much as it pools. Thick and sluggish, until suddenly you're standing in it again, wondering how hours slipped by unnoticed. Your stomach reminds you, politely at first, then insistently, that you're not exempt from hunger just because you're in charge of feeding others. You consider making yourself a portion, then decide to wait. That's a habit forming already. You come last. The ration crates arrive with the enthusiasm of a tired donkey. Two men drag them along the trench floor. Wood scraping, lids warped from moisture. This is the official midday issue. The sort of thing that planners back home have reduced to neat tables and calorie counts. Inside, reality greets you. Tins. So many tins. Meat and vegetable, it says, which could mean almost anything if you don't ask questions. You don't ask questions. Experience has taught you that curiosity here is rarely rewarded. This, you know, is the iconic food of the Great War, preserved. Industrial. Designed to survive transport rather than delight a human mouth. The big historical truth is that mass-produced tinned food made trench warfare possible at all. Armies couldn't have fed millions otherwise. The smaller, less glamorous truth is that opening those tins day after day wears people down in ways no strategist ever fully calculated. You pry one open and are greeted by a smell that's not offensive. Exactly, just aggressively uninteresting. You decide on a stew. Calling it that feels generous. But words matter. You tip the contents into the pot. Add water. Stir. The mixture slumps together like it's given up on having distinct ingredients. Somewhere behind you, a man jokes that this looks like something his dog wouldn't eat. Another replies that his dog enlisted last year. You allow yourself a small smile. That's joke number one for the segment. You think vaguely, as if counting them might make this all more manageable. You heat slowly, because rushing leads to scorching, and scorching leads to mutiny. Or at least passive-aggressive silence. As the pot warms, the smell spreads. It's oddly comforting now, familiar in the way bad habits are. You realize that smell is a signal. Men drift closer without meaning to. Hunger has a magnetic pull. There's a strange power in that. One you didn't expect when you were handed a ladle instead of a rifle. A lesser-known fact floats up from memory. Something an older cook mentioned in passing. Trench meals were often eaten cold not by choice, but by necessity. Fire drew fire. Many cooks risked punishment, or worse, by lighting stoves at the wrong time. You glance upward instinctively, as if the sky might be watching. Today, at least, the guns are quieter. You keep going, stirring like you're pretending this is a normal afternoon. As you work, you think about the menu variety promised on paper. Officially, there's rotation. Beef today, pork tomorrow, maybe fish on a good week. In practice, supply lines hiccup, trains derail, depots miscount, The result is repetition so intense it starts to feel personal. Historians still debate how monotonous diets affected morale versus physical health. From where you stand, those two things feel inseparable. When food surprises you, hope sneaks in with it. When it doesn't, hope stays away. You add a handful of dried peas, knowing they won't fully soften in time. They'll be little green bullets in the stew. Something to chew, something to complain about. Complaints, you're learning, are signs of life. A silent trench is never a good sign. Someone nearby grumbles that his spoon bent last time. You suggest he stir less aggressively. That's joke number 2, weak but serviceable. Serving lunch feels heavier than breakfast. Men eat faster, more urgently, as if afraid the pot might vanish if they pause. You notice how they angle their bodies, shielding bowls from accidental bumps. From the idea of scarcity itself. You ladle carefully, trying to make portions look equal even when you know they aren't. Fairness here is partly an illusion, but it's one worth maintaining. One man asks what's in it. You consider honesty, then go with, mostly courage. He snorts. Joke number 3, and a genuine one this time. You feel absurdly proud. If feeding bodies is your job, feeding spirits might be your side hustle. When the pot runs low, you scrape and tilt, coaxing out the last servings. You don't sit down until everyone else has. When you finally do, your portion is thin and lukewarm. You eat anyway. It tastes like effort and metal and resignation. You chase it with a swallow of boiled water and pretend that's refreshing. As the trench settles again, you lean back, stomach full enough to stop complaining. You think about how strange it is that this ladle, this pot, anchors you more firmly to the war than any weapon could. Historians still argue about whose experiences define the Great War. Infantry, officers, generals, rarely the cooks. But here you are, up to your elbows in history, stirring it slowly, one meal at a time. By late afternoon, the tin problem becomes personal. You're staring at a stack of empty cans piled like a dull metallic monument to repetition. They clink softly when you nudge them aside. A sound that now lives in your head rent-free. Somewhere in a staff office miles away. This food has a proper name, something tidy and reassuring. Out here, it's just the meat. No one bothers specifying further. Specificity implies hope. This is where the legend of trench food truly earns its reputation. Tinned meat, eaten day after day, doesn't just fill you up. It slowly convinces you that texture is optional and joy is overrated. You pry open another can and find the same pale, gelatinous promise of protein. It slides into the pot with a sound you try not to think about too much. You tell yourself it's efficient. You tell yourself it's wartime. You do not tell yourself it's good. The historical event humming in the background is the grinding stalemate of 1915–1916. When both sides realized the war wasn't ending anytime soon, trenches became permanent addresses. Kitchens, such as they were, followed suit. What most people don't realize is how central canned meat became to that permanence. Fresh food couldn't reliably reach the front. Refrigeration was a fantasy, so tins ruled everything. There's a lesser-known detail. 2. Some batches of meat were already months old when they arrived. Preserved more by salt and luck than anything else. You try to improve things. You always do. You skim off excess fat. Add water slowly. Stir until the stew looks less like an accusation. Someone suggests adding bread directly into the pot to thicken it. Someone else suggests not asking questions. You do both. This is cooking as damage control. The men gather again, drawn by habit more than appetite. One of them squints into his bowl and declares that today's meat tastes extra philosophical. You ask what that means. He shrugs and says it makes him question existence. That's joke number 1, and it lands because it's true. Another man claims he once dreamed of a cow chasing him down the trench. Apologizing. Joke number 2. You make a mental note. The meat is officially haunting people now. Despite the humor, you see the toll. Chewing slows. Faces tighten. This isn't just boredom, it's fatigue layered on fatigue. Historians still debate how much nutritional deficiency affected trench soldiers' endurance versus sheer psychological strain. Watching men poke at their food, you suspect the answer is both. Heavily. Calories keep bodies upright. Pleasure keeps minds intact. You're running low on one of those. You eat your portion standing. Spoon scraping metal. It's not awful. That's the highest praise available. You wash it down with tea so weak it's mostly a rumor of leaves. Still, the warmth helps. Warmth always helps. You remember someone saying once that hot food in the trenches wasn't about taste. It was about reminding the body it hadn't frozen in place. You cling to that thought. As evening approaches, the guns wake up again. Not close enough to send you diving, but close enough to keep you alert. You adjust the stove instinctively. Shielding the flame. Smoke discipline matters more now. One careless plume and you've announced dinner to the enemy. You joke, quietly, that even the shells are tired of this menu. Joke number 3. No one responds, but someone exhales slowly, and you take that as approval. When the last bowl is filled, you look at the pot and feel something dangerously close to resentment. Not toward the men, toward the food itself. You shake it off. Food isn't the enemy. Circumstances are. You rinse the pot again, hands aching, and stack the tins away. Tomorrow, there will be more. There is always more. You settle back against the trench wall as dusk thickens. The smell of canned meat lingers, clinging to your clothes, your skin, your thoughts. You wonder, briefly, what it will take to enjoy a meal again someday. Historians still argue about when soldiers lost their taste for normal life. You suspect it starts right here. Spoon deep in a tin, learning that survival doesn't always come with satisfaction. The light fades. Somewhere, a rat squeaks. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to rest them. Tomorrow, the tins will be waiting. Night doesn't arrive cleanly in the trench. It seeps in, fooling at your feet first, then climbing the walls until everything feels slightly unreal. Like you're cooking inside a bad memory. You're still awake because water has become the main character of your life. Not drinking it, finding it, protecting it, persuading it to become safe. Somewhere along the line, you've learned the quiet truth every trench cook knows. Food can be disappointing. But bad water is deadly. The official instruction is simple enough. Boil all water. The unofficial reality is complicated. Fuel is limited, time is limited, and the water you're starting with is questionable. It comes from shell holes. From shallow wells dug too close to latrines. From places you wouldn't let a dog drink back home. You stare into a bucket and tell yourself it's just muddy. Muddy is manageable. Muddy is honest. What worries you are the things you can't see. This is one of those unglamorous historical facts that rarely makes it into textbooks. Disease shaped the First World War as much as artillery did. Dysentery, typhoid, and cholera haunted the trenches, spreading quietly through contaminated water and unwashed hands. Entire units were sidelined not by enemy fire, but by stomach cramps and dehydration. Historians still debate whether improved sanitation later in the war saved more lives than tactical innovations. Standing here, guarding a kettle like its treasure, you'd vote yes without hesitation. You coax the fire back to life, shielding the flame with your body. The kettle takes forever to heat, as if it knows it's important and wants the attention. Steam finally curls upward, thin and hopeful. You watch it like a hawk. Someone nearby jokes that this is the fanciest spa treatment the water's ever had. Joke number 1. You tell him it's a luxury experience, boiled, stirred, and served with a side of existential dread. When the water bubbles properly, you feel a strange surge of relief, almost pride. This boring, practical moment is you doing your job well. You pour carefully, mindful not to waste a drop. Every cup filled is one less risk. One less man doubled over later, cursing the day he trusted trench water. You've learned that preventing suffering is quieter than reacting to it, and far less appreciated. As you work, a memory floats up of clear taps, of water you never questioned. You wonder if you'll ever drink again without thinking about where it came from. That's another hidden cost of this war. It steals your ability to take basics for granted. Historians still argue about when soldiers truly became modern in their thinking. You suspect it's the moment water stops being background and becomes strategy. Someone complains that the boiled water tastes flat. You suggest adding imagination. Joke number 2. Another man swears he can taste metal. You don't argue. The kettle has seen better days. Still, no one refuses a cup. Thirst beats preference every time. The shelling fades into a distant murmur. Like thunder moving away, you take advantage of the relative quiet to scrub utensils as best you can. Fingers numb, movements automatic. Cleanliness here is aspirational, but you try anyway. A lesser-known truth is that trench cooks often became amateur sanitation officers, fighting germs with nothing but hot water and stubbornness. You didn't sign up for that, but here you are. When you finally sit down, you sip from your own mug. Water's still warm. It tastes like nothing, and that feels like success. You lean your head back, eyes half closed, listening to the trench breathe around you. Someone mutters a half-remembered song. Somewhere, a rat scurries, unimpressed by your hygiene efforts. Historians still debate which small comforts mattered most to soldiers: letters, sleep, food, warmth. You'd add safe water to the list. Even if it's not poetic. You finish your mug slowly, savoring the absence of pain it represents. Tomorrow, you'll do this all again. Boil, pour, protect. In a war defined by destruction, you've become a quiet guardian of something fragile and essential. You first notice the eyes before the bodies. 2 small points of reflection, low to the ground, catching the faint light like misplaced stars. Then another pair, then another. By now, you already know what they belong to. The trench has residents who never enlisted, never rotate out, and never complain about the food, at least not out loud. The rats have arrived for their shift. They move with confidence, which is the most unsettling part. These aren't skittish, corner-dwelling creatures. These are trench rats, thick, well-fed, and entirely unimpressed by human authority. One scurries along a plank near your kitchen area, pauses, and looks at you as if you're late with dinner. You consider asserting dominance. You decide against it. This is their neighborhood too. Rats are one of those details everyone mentions when talking about the Great War, but rarely with much depth. The popular image is exaggerated but not invented. Trenches provided warmth, food scraps, and an unfortunate abundance of bodies. Rats thrived. The lesser-known detail is how quickly soldiers adapted to their presence. Fear turned into irritation, irritation into a kind of resigned coexistence. You don't scream when one darts past your boot. You sigh. Progress. You suppose. You keep your supplies as sealed as possible. Though, sealed is a flexible concept when wood warps and metal bends. You've learned to hang what you can, stash what you can't, and accept losses with philosophical calm. A loaf of bread goes missing overnight. You blame the rats, though deep down you know hunger makes everyone a suspect. Joke number 1. You tell someone the rats are running their own mess hall. He replies that at least they're eating well. The historical backdrop hums along. Months of entrenched living turning battlefields into ecosystems of their own. Trench life wasn't just humans versus humans. It was humans versus mud, weather, disease, and animals that adapted faster than anyone expected. Historians still debate how much vermin contributed to the spread of illness versus poor sanitation alone. From your vantage point, it feels like a team effort. One rat gets particularly bold, nosing near the stove while you're stirring. You tap the ground with your boot, not aiming to hit, just to remind it you're still here. It retreats a few inches, then stops. Standoff. You joke quietly that you've found the enemy's elite scouts. Joke number 2. The rat flicks its tail. Unimpressed. Despite everything, you can't fully hate them. In a strange way, they're proof that life persists here, even if it's not the kind you'd invite home. Some soldiers even name them, which feels like tempting fate, but also very human. Naming things makes them smaller, manageable. As night deepens, the rats grow bolder, weaving through shadows, cleaning up crumbs you didn't know you dropped. You double-check your pots, your crates, your precious water. This is part of the job too. Guarding food not just from spoilage, but from competition. You laugh softly at the thought that somewhere back home, cooks worry about presentation. You worry about rodents with opinions. Eventually, fatigue outweighs vigilance. You sit back, listening to the trench settle into its nocturnal rhythm, distant guns, quiet voices, the soft, constant movement of unseen paws. Historians still argue about what soldiers remembered most vividly after the war. Battles, certainly. Losses, always. But you suspect many also remembered nights like this, sharing space with creatures that adapted better to the trenches than humans ever could. You close your eyes, not to sleep fully, just to rest them. Tomorrow, you'll cook again. Tomorrow, the rats will be there too. In this underground world, Everyone finds a way to survive, even if it means stealing crumbs from history's margins. Morning brings with it a smell before it brings light. It creeps through the trench like an uninvited memory. Layered and stubborn, you recognize it instantly. Yesterday's soup. Damp wool, oil, smoke, and underneath it all, the sharp metallic edge of war. The strange thing is how quickly your brain stops objecting. What once would have turned your stomach now barely registers. Adaptation, you're learning, is not graceful, it's practical. You're already at the stove again, coaxing life out of a fire that seems personally offended by the idea of working 2 days in a row. The smell of simmering food mixes with the ever-present tang of cordite drifting in from somewhere down the line. It's a pairing no chef would ever recommend. Yet here it is, soup and explosives. Comfort and threat sharing the same air. You joke quietly that this is what people mean when they say a meal has bite. Joke number 1. It's early. Expectations are low. This is the reality few imagine when they think of wartime cooking. It's not heroic. It's sensory overload. Day after day, your nose never gets a break. Even when you stop smelling the bad things. The good ones don't feel good anymore. They're just signals, food is coming. Danger might follow. Historians still debate how constant sensory stress affected soldiers' long-term mental health. Standing here, breathing in soup and smoke, you suspect it rewired people permanently. A shell lands far enough away to make the ground shiver. Close enough to dust the pot with a fine sprinkle of dirt. You pause, spoon hovering, then stir it in without comment. Soil is just another seasoning now. Somewhere behind you, someone mutters that this batch has earthy notes. Joke number 2. You considered charging extra. Despite everything, the smell draws men in. Hunger doesn't care about aesthetics. They cluster nearby, talking softly, boots shifting in the mud. One man says the soup reminds him of his mother's cooking. Another says his mother would be insulted. You let that exchange breathe. Nostalgia is a powerful spice, even when it's wildly inaccurate. The larger historical truth hums on. By this point in the war, everyone understands it's a long haul. Shortages aren't temporary. Smells don't clear. Trench life settles into a grim normal. What's less talked about is how smell became memory's strongest anchor. Long after uniforms were gone and medals tucked away, a whiff of boiled cabbage or weak stew could drag veterans right back underground. Historians still argue about which senses most strongly trigger wartime recollection. You'd put your money on the nose. You serve carefully, watching faces as bowls are filled. There's less chatter today, more quiet eating. The shelling has picked up again. Rhythmic and dull, like a bad neighbor who won't stop knocking. You keep one ear tuned, one eye on the fire. Cooking under these conditions has taught you a strange multitasking skill set you doubt will ever make it onto a resume. Someone complains that the soup smells different today. You tell him it's evolving. Joke number 3. He nods solemnly, as if that explains everything. In a way, it does. Everything here is evolving: food, people, expectations. Usually in the direction of barely adequate, but still functioning. When the pot is empty, the smell lingers, clinging to the trench like a fog. You rinse utensils, hands moving on autopilot, mind drifting. You realize you can now tell the time of day by scent alone. Morning porridge, Midday tins, evening stew, nighttime smoke and damp. It's not a clock you wanted, but it works. As you settle back against the trench wall, you breathe out slowly, accepting the air as it is. You no longer wish it were different. That feels like a small surrender. And also a necessary one. Tomorrow, there will be more soup, more smoke, more memories being built out of smell. You close your eyes, letting the trench breathe around you. Already halfway to the next meal. You learn the sound before you learn the meaning. A thin, rising whistle that cuts through conversation, through thought, through whatever fragile calm you've assembled. You freeze, spoon halfway through a stir, muscles locking on instinct. There's a pause, always a pause, and then the distant thud. Not close, not this time. The trench exhales collectively, like a room full of people who forgot they were holding their breath. Cooking under shellfire is less about bravery and more about pattern recognition. You start sorting sounds into mental boxes: outgoing, incoming, close, far. It's a skill no one lists on enlistment forms. But you pick it up quickly if you want to keep cooking and breathing. Historians still debate how soldiers adapted so fast to constant bombardment. From where you stand, it's simple. You adapt, or you stop existing. There's very little middle ground. You go back to stirring, because stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. The pot rattles slightly with each distant impact. Liquid sloshing like it's nervous too. You joke quietly that the soup is trying to escape. Joke number 1. A man nearby mutters that he doesn't blame it. That's close enough to laughter. This moment, this strange overlap of domestic routine and industrial violence, is one of the defining contradictions of trench life. The Great War is remembered for its artillery barrages, walls of fire reshaping landscapes. What's less commonly discussed is how ordinary tasks continued beneath that chaos. Men shaved, letters were written, and you cooked, even as the sky tried to kill everyone involved. Historians still argue whether maintaining routine helped soldiers cope or merely masked trauma until later. Right now, you don't care. The routine keeps the soup hot. The shelling intensifies briefly. Closer thuds. Dirt trickles down the trench walls, pattering softly into the pot. You pause, glance at the surface, then stir it in. You've crossed a line where contamination becomes philosophical. Someone says this batch has extra crunch. Joke number 2. You consider charging it as a feature. You're acutely aware of smoke now. Every curl feels like a risk. You shield the stove, lower the flame, adjust without thinking. Trench cooks were often reprimanded for drawing attention with fire, yet expected to produce hot meals anyway. It's a balancing act no one wins perfectly. Historians still debate how many casualties resulted indirectly from visible kitchens. The numbers blur. The responsibility doesn't. A particularly loud explosion makes the trench shudder. You duck instinctively, ladle clanging against the pot. For a heartbeat, everything goes quiet except for the ringing in your ears. Then voices return, low and annoyed, as if the interruption was rude. You straighten, smooth your coat, and resume serving. Joke number 3 slips out. You announce that dinner comes with live entertainment tonight. No one applauds, but someone shakes his head, smiling despite himself. Men eat faster now, not panicked, just efficient. They've learned that food enjoyed later might not exist later. You watch them, aware that this may be the last hot thing they experience today. That knowledge sits heavy in your chest, heavier than the pot ever felt. A lesser-known truth is that cooks often knew casualty lists before anyone else, not officially, but intuitively. You see who eats like they're saying goodbye. When the barrage drifts away again, relief settles in awkwardly, like a guest who arrived too late. You clean up, hands trembling slightly now that the danger has passed. Adrenaline waits until it's safe to make itself known. Historians still argue about courage under fire. What counts? What doesn't? Standing here, wiping soot from your fingers, you decide courage sometimes looks like refusing to let the soup burn. You sit back against the trench wall, heart slowing, ears still tuned for whistles. The pot is empty. The line is fed. For now, that's enough. You breathe in, breathe out, and wait for the next sound that tells you whether to stir or to run. The hunger sneaks up on you the way fog does, quietly, patiently, until suddenly everything feels harder. You've eaten today, technically, enough to count on paper. But there's a difference between eating and being satisfied. And your body knows it even if the ration ledger doesn't. You feel it in the way your hands shake slightly when you lift the pot, in the hollow pressure just under your ribs that never quite goes away. You notice it in others too. The way conversations trail off sooner. The way jokes land softer. Fear gets all the attention in war stories. But hunger is the more reliable enemy. Fear spikes and fades. Hunger just sits there, gnawing, asking for attention every minute of the day. Historians still debate whether prolonged undernourishment weakened trench soldiers more than constant stress. Watching men lick their spoons clean, you'd argue hunger wins on endurance alone. There's a strange hierarchy of suffering here, and hunger ranks high. Men will endure shelling, cold, even rats with a grim sort of acceptance. But when food runs thin, morale cracks fast. You've seen it happen in miniature already, irritation over portions. Glances into the pot that last a little too long. You try to stretch meals, to make them feel larger than they are. Bread torn slowly, soup served hotter than necessary. Small tricks, but they matter. You overhear someone say he'd rather face another barrage than another week like this. You don't comment, but you understand the sentiment. Hunger erodes patience, then hope, then identity. It turns days into obstacles instead of experiences. A lesser-known fact, whispered among the cooks, is that some units unofficially prioritized feeding men before attacks, not for strength, but for spirit. A full stomach doesn't make you brave, but an empty one makes you desperate. You catch yourself daydreaming about food that doesn't exist here. Crisp bread, fruit that snaps when you bite it, butter that melts instead of smears. The images arrive uninvited and leave you worse off than before. You shake your head, focusing back on the trench, on the immediate. Daydreaming is dangerous. It reminds you of what you're missing. Someone complains that his hunger feels louder at night. You tell him that's because there's less noise to drown it out. Joke number 1. Dry as the bread. He nods anyway. Another man says he'd trade his boots for a decent meal. You reply that barefoot hunger sounds even worse. Joke number 2. Humor here is less about laughter and more about acknowledging the problem without letting it own you. As evening approaches, you prepare what you can, aware it won't be enough. You serve carefully, watching faces, Adjusting portions by instinct. You're not fair. You're strategic. The man on watch gets a little more. The one coughing gets a little more. You tell yourself it balances out. Historians still debate whether such quiet decisions mattered in the long run. You know they mattered tonight. When you finally sit down, bowl in hand, the hunger eases just enough to let exhaustion take over. You eat slowly, savoring warmth more than taste. You realize that hunger has taught you something uncomfortable. How little it takes to keep going. And how much it takes to feel human. As darkness settles, the trench grows quieter, but your stomach doesn't. It murmurs, dissatisfied, unconvinced. You rest your head against the wall and breathe through it. Tomorrow, there will be more food. Or there won't. Either way, you'll cook. Because in this place, feeding others is how you push back against the one enemy that never stops advancing. Morning arrives with a gift so small it feels ridiculous to call it that. Coffee. Or at least something wearing coffee's name like a borrowed coat. The smell alone does half the work. Drifting through the trench with a confidence no shell ever manages. Heads lift, eyes open wider. Someone actually smiles, then looks embarrassed about it. You pretend not to notice. This is serious business. You've learned that caffeine in the trenches isn't a luxury. It's infrastructure. The army knows it too. That's why even when other supplies falter, sacks of ground beans or a dark, bitter approximation still find their way forward. The big historical fact is that stimulants quietly fueled the war effort as much as bullets did. The lesser-known detail is just how weak the brew often was. This isn't cafe coffee. It's hope-flavored water. You measure carefully, because running out would be unforgivable. You boil the water, watching steam rise like a promise. Then stir in the grounds. The liquid turns dark enough to suggest seriousness. That's good enough. Someone jokes that this could wake the dead. You reply that it mostly just annoys them into consciousness. Joke number 1. It lands well. Coffee jokes always do. As you pour, mugs clink softly, hands steadying despite the cold. You notice how differently men treat this drink. Soup is swallowed, coffee is cradled. They sip slowly, eyes closing, as if trying to extract more than flavor from it. Warmth, memory, alertness, anything useful. You overhear someone say it tastes like home. Someone else counters that home had better standards. Joke number 2, and a fair one. Caffeine sharpens the trench. Conversations pick up. Movements get quicker. Even the jokes improve slightly. Which feels like a scientific breakthrough. Historians still debate whether stimulants improved combat effectiveness or merely masked exhaustion. Standing here, watching men straighten just a bit, you suspect it does both. It doesn't erase fatigue, it bullies it into the background. You take your own mug last. The first sip is bitter, thin, and wonderful. Your brain flickers awake. Thoughts lining up more neatly than they have in days. For a moment, the war feels manageable, not small. Not distant, but organized. You laugh softly at that. Joke number 3. Internal and private. Imagine thinking coffee could fix this. As the caffeine settles in, the trench hums with low energy. Men clean weapons, check gear, move with purpose. You clean your pots. Faster now. Hands steadier. It strikes you that coffee doesn't just wake bodies. It restores a sense of sequence. Morning happens. Tasks follow. The day has shape again. A runner passes with news you don't fully catch. It doesn't matter. What matters is that everyone heard it while awake. You glance at the kettle. Already thinking ahead. There's comfort in that repetition. Historians still argue about the small rituals that kept soldiers sane. You'd nominate this one without hesitation. Hot coffee in a cold trench. Pretending for 5 minutes that this is just another morning. When the mugs are empty, the effect lingers like an aftertaste. You rinse them carefully, knowing how important they'll be tomorrow. You sit back against the wall, feeling the caffeine hum under your skin, and allow yourself a rare moment of optimism. Not about the war, about the next hour. The guns haven't started up yet. The trench breathes quietly. You sip the last drops from your mug and think. Not for the first time. That survival here is built on tiny chemical miracles and stubborn routines. Coffee included. By midday, you're thinking about flavor the way a sailor thinks about land, fondly. Vaguely, and with the understanding that it may not be real anymore. The problem isn't hunger today. It's monotony. The kind that creeps in and whispers that every meal from now until the end of time will taste exactly like the last one. You stare into the ration box, hoping it might surprise you. It does not. Salt is your first concern. Or rather, the absence of it. Somewhere earlier in the war, salt was plentiful enough to be taken for granted. Now it arrives irregularly, disappears quickly, and is guarded with more care than some weapons. You sprinkle what little you have like you're performing a ritual, not seasoning food so much as apologizing to it. Historians still debate how supply prioritization shifted as the war dragged on. You suspect salt didn't lose importance, people just stopped expecting it. Pepper is a memory, herbs are a joke, fresh anything belongs to another universe. Still, you try, you always try. You toast bread scraps until they're almost burnt. Then crumble them into the pot for texture. You let onions cook longer when you have them, coaxing out sweetness like you're negotiating with a stubborn witness. This is trench cooking at its most creative, turning absence into something passable. A lesser-known fact slips back into your mind. Some trench cooks carried tiny, personal stashes of seasoning, sent from home or acquired through questionable trades. Bay leaves tucked into letters. A pinch of dried thyme wrapped in paper. Treasures small enough to hide. Valuable enough to transform a meal. You don't have that luxury today. What you have is imagination and a willingness to lie convincingly. Someone asks what you're making. You say it's a new variation. Joke number 1. He asks how it's different. You say it's served with confidence. Joke number 2. He nods. Because confidence goes a long way here. As the pot warms, you taste carefully, adjusting in tiny increments. Too much of anything would be a disaster. Too little is just normal. You find a narrow middle ground and declare victory. Historians still argue about whether soldiers' taste buds dulled over time or whether expectations simply collapsed. Standing here, spoon in hand, you suspect it's both. Flavor doesn't vanish, it just stops being the point. The men gather, bowls ready. You serve with a practiced eye, watching reactions closely. Someone raises an eyebrow, then shrugs. That's a good sign. Another says it's not bad, which in trench language is the highest compliment available. You take a small bow you don't deserve. You eat last, as usual. The food is warm, filling, faintly interesting if you're generous. You chew slowly, trying to pinpoint what makes it different. Maybe it's just the effort. Maybe knowing someone cared enough to try adds a flavor no ration crate can supply. As you clean up, you realize something quietly important. Seasoning isn't just about taste. It's about marking time, about declaring that today is not exactly the same as yesterday. Historians still debate how soldiers kept track of days in the trenches. You think it might have been through small differences like this: slightly darker soup, slightly better bread, a meal that almost surprised you. You set the pot aside and sit back, hands resting on your knees. The guns rumble distantly, uninterested in your culinary experiments. You breathe in, breathe out, and start thinking about the next meal. Not because you're inspired, because routine, like seasoning, keeps everything from going completely bland. There's a moment you start to recognize, though you never get used to it. It happens when you hand over a bowl and your fingers brush someone else's. And for just a second you know, without being told, that this might be the last meal they ever eat. No announcement, no music, just a quiet certainty that settles in your chest like a stone. You don't treat them differently. Not outwardly. You ladle the same portion, offer the same nod. Anything else would feel like admitting too much. The trench teaches you that foreknowledge is a burden best carried silently. Historians still debate whether soldiers sensed their own deaths before major actions. You don't know about that. You only know that sometimes, when you serve food, the air changes. The historical backdrop presses in now. Raids, patrols, small, brutal actions that don't make headlines but claim lives all the same. Men are selected, gear checked, faces washed with cold water that pretends to be refreshing. You keep cooking because stopping would make it real. A lesser-known truth is that cooks often fed men just before night operations. Aware, painfully, that food might be the final kindness they could offer. Someone jokes about needing energy for the walk. You reply that the soup is fortified with bravery. Joke number 1. It lands unevenly. Another man says he'll bring you back something from the enemy trench. You tell him you'd settle for a clean spoon. Joke number 2. That one works better. Laughter. Brief and fragile. Flickers and fades. You notice how carefully some men eat now. Slow, deliberate, as if memorizing the act. Others shovel it down, refusing to think at all. There's no right way. You watch and learn, storing these images somewhere deep, knowing they'll surface later, uninvited. Historians still argue about the psychological weight of last meals in wartime. Were they comfort or cruelty? Did they ground men or remind them of what they stood to lose? Standing here, you suspect they did both at once. Comfort and pain rarely bother to take turns. You clean the pot while they move off into the darkness. Packs rustling softly. The trench feels emptier immediately. Like a room after guests leave but the air hasn't settled yet. You rinse utensils you might not need tomorrow. You hate yourself a little for thinking that way. Then let it go. There's no room for that kind of guilt here. Later, when some return and some don't, you say nothing. You set aside portions for those who aren't coming back. Then quietly redistribute them. Waste is unacceptable. Silence is the price. A lesser-known detail, rarely written down, is how often food was reassigned after casualties. and how no one ever commented on it aloud. You sit back against the trench wall. Exhaustion heavy now, not just in your body but behind your eyes. Historians still debate what haunted veterans most, the violence or the waiting. You think it might be moments like this, when kindness and finality overlap so closely they're almost the same thing. The trench settles into night again. You close your eyes, not praying, not thinking, just breathing. Tomorrow, you'll cook for whoever is left. And that, somehow, will have to be enough. The calendar insists it's a special day, even if the trench doesn't care. Someone mentions it in passing, Christmas or New Year's, depending on where the war has dragged you and how long you've been counting. The word feels strange here, like a guest who showed up in the wrong clothes. Still, it lingers, a holiday, a day that's supposed to mean something. You feel it settle on your shoulders as an obligation. If there's ever a time to try a little harder, it's now, not because anyone expects miracles, but because pretending today is different might make it so. Even briefly, historians still debate how widespread holiday truces and celebrations really were along the front. From where you stand, they were rare, fragile, and mostly internal. The fighting didn't stop, but sometimes, expectations softened. You dig through supplies with renewed focus. An extra ration of bread appears. Saved and forgotten. A tin of jam, dented but intact, surfaces like buried treasure. Someone produces a handful of raisins from a coat pocket. Hoarded for weeks. These aren't ingredients so much as symbols. You treat them carefully, like they might shatter if handled roughly. Cooking feels ceremonial now. You stir slower, more deliberately. You divide things more evenly than usual. Even if it costs you your own portion. The smell is still trench smell, mud, smoke, old metal, but threaded through it is something sweeter. Something almost normal. A lesser-known detail is that holiday meals in the trenches were often worse nutritionally than standard rations. Stretched thin to include everyone. No one complained. Inclusion mattered more than fullness. The men gather earlier than usual. There's an awkwardness to it. Like everyone is waiting for instructions on how to feel. Someone hums a tune they half remember from home. Someone else shushes him, not unkindly. You ladle carefully, making sure each bowl gets a trace of jam. A few raisins, a sign that today is marked. Joke number 1 slips out when you announce this as the chef's seasonal special. Someone bows theatrically. Joke number 2 follows when another asks for seconds and you tell him it's a limited time offer. The laughter that comes is real. If short-lived, that's enough. As they eat, stories surface. Brief, selective ones. A kitchen back home. A smell of baking. Snow that didn't smell like cordite. You listen without interrupting. Holidays loosen memories that are usually kept under guard. Historians still argue about whether nostalgia helped soldiers cope or made things worse. You think it depends on how long you let it stay. You eat last. As always, your portion is small, but it tastes different, not because it is, but because context does most of the work. For a few minutes, the trench isn't just a holding space between bombardments. It's a place where people sat together and acknowledged a date. Outside, the war continues unimpressed. Guns rumble. Flares rise. Nothing officially changes. But when the bowls are empty and the men drift back to their posts, something lingers. Not joy. Not peace. Just a quiet recognition that today was noted. You clean up slowly, hands steady, mind calm in a way it hasn't been for days. Historians still debate how soldiers measured time in the trenches. You think some days were counted not by battles, but by meals like this, imperfect, symbolic, and human. As night settles in, you lean back against the trench wall and allow yourself a long breath. Tomorrow will be ordinary again. But tonight, you marked the day, and in a place designed to erase individuality. That feels like a small, stubborn victory. The pot becomes a listening device long before it's a cooking tool. You notice it happening gradually. Men linger a little longer near the steam. Bowls already empty, hands still wrapped around nothing. They talk while pretending not to. You stir and keep your eyes on the surface. Because that's the unspoken agreement, you're here. You're present, but you're not judging. The trench has an appetite for rumors. They travel faster than official orders and stick harder than facts. Someone says the war will be over by spring. Someone else heard the enemy is running out of men. A third claims there's a new weapon coming that will end everything decisively. You've learned not to react. Reacting gives rumors weight. Letting them drift keeps them light. This is one of those lesser-known realities of trench life. The kitchen doubles as an information exchange. Officers get briefings. Soldiers get soup and speculation. Historians still debate how misinformation affected morale during the Great War. From where you stand, rumors are coping mechanisms. They fill the silence with something that isn't shellfire. You ladle slowly, listening to half-truths bump into each other. Someone swears he saw prisoners being marched back yesterday. Proof the enemy is weakening. Someone else counters that he saw fresh enemy troops arriving. Proof the opposite. You resist the urge to point out that both can be true. Joke number 1 slips out instead. You say the soup has heard worse arguments. A few men chuckle. The tension eases. There's comfort in speculation. It gives the future shape. Even if the shape is wrong. You notice how people lean in when the rumors turn hopeful. How they retreat slightly when they turn grim. The pot steams steadily, impartial. You wonder briefly if future historians will ever understand how much of the war was fought in conversations like these. Over thin stew and weak tea. Someone asks you what you think. You shrug and say you think the soup needs another minute. Joke number 2. It's safer that way. You're not paid in opinions. You're paid in quiet continuity. As the line thins, the rumors thin too, drifting off with the men back to their posts. You scrape the pot, rinse it, and feel oddly drained, not from the work, but from the weight of all that unspoken hope and fear. Historians still argue about the psychological strain of prolonged uncertainty. You think it's heavier than certainty. Even bad certainty. You sit back against the trench wall, listening now to the absence of voices. The pot is empty. The rumors will refill tomorrow. For tonight, you rest, knowing that sometimes your job isn't just feeding bodies. It's absorbing stories so they don't tear people apart. The memory hits you sideways, the way the best and worst ones do. You're tearing bread, carefully, so it looks fair, and suddenly you're not here at all. You're back in a kitchen that has walls which don't sweat, a table that doesn't wobble, a window that lets light in without asking permission from the weather. It lasts half a second. Then the trench coughs. And you're back. Home creeps in like that. Uninvited. Persistent. It doesn't arrive as a full picture. Just fragments. The sound of cutlery placed down without urgency. The smell of something baked long enough to be patient. You've noticed it happens to everyone. Usually around meals. Food unlocks memories faster than letters ever do. Historians still debate which reminders of civilian life were hardest for soldiers to process. You'd put ordinary dinners high on the list. Someone nearby says this stew reminds him of Sundays. You ask which part. He says the disappointment. Joke number 1. And it lands because it hurts just enough. Another man swears his mother would have fixed this with butter. You agree. Then add that butter appears to have died bravely in the first months of the war. Joke number 2. A weak laugh ripples through the group. You realize that talking about home has rules. You can mention food. You can mention weather. You can mention pets. You don't mention faces too long. You don't mention children by name unless you're ready for silence. You ladle and listen, acting as anchor while minds drift just far enough to breathe. The larger truth presses in. Most of these men won't go back to the kitchens they remember. Not unchanged. Anyway, historians still argue about when the old world truly ended. From where you stand, it ended somewhere between the first bad meal eaten without complaint and the first good memory that hurt more than it comforted. You eat your portion standing. As usual. It's fine. You barely notice the taste. What you notice is how different eating feels now. Back home, meals filled time. Here, they divide it. Before food, after food, everything else happens in between. As the bowls empty, the talk fades. Men drift away, carrying their memories with them like contraband. You scrub the pot harder than necessary, grounding yourself in the physical. Steel, water, motion. You remind yourself that remembering too much at once is dangerous. Historians still debate whether nostalgia helped soldiers survive or quietly broke them. Watching the trench settle again. You think it did both. Depending on the day, you sit back, close your eyes, and let the memory of that other kitchen blur and soften. Tomorrow, you'll cook again. Here, where you are now, you didn't mean to see it. That's how most unsettling things happen here, by accident. In the corner of your vision. When you're busy with something ordinary. A supply detail passes along the trench. And for a brief moment you glimpse the contents of a crate not meant for you. Enemy markings. Different language. Different tins. Different food. The idea lands heavier than expected. The enemy eats too. It shouldn't surprise you. Of course they do. They're human. They get hungry. They complain. Still, there's something destabilizing about seeing proof of it. You'd grown used to imagining them as distant noise. As artillery flashes and rumors. Seeing their food makes them uncomfortably domestic. Historians still debate how dehumanization functioned in the Great War. How soldiers reconciled killing with shared humanity. Standing here, staring at a crate of unfamiliar rations, you feel that reconciliation wobble. Later, someone confirms it quietly. A patrol turned back early. They found an abandoned position. Left behind were pots still warm. Bread half-eaten. Not a trap. Just a hurried retreat. You imagine their cook, somewhere else now, cursing missing supplies. Improvising just like you. The thought sticks. There's a strange, forbidden curiosity that follows. What do they eat? Is it better? Worse? Someone claims the enemy has real coffee. Someone else swears they're living on turnips and regret. You say nothing. Comparison is dangerous. Joke number 1 eventually slips out anyway. You suggest that if their food is better, it's only because they haven't met your cooking yet. That gets a few smiles. It helps. A lesser-known fact floats through your mind. Soldiers on both sides occasionally traded food during unofficial lulls. Especially early in the war. Bread tossed across no man's land. Cigarettes exchanged for chocolate. Historians still argue how widespread this was and whether it undermined discipline. From your perspective, it just proves hunger doesn't respect uniforms. You serve lunch with this new awareness humming under your skin. Every spoonful now feels slightly political. This stew is yours. This routine is yours. Across the lines, someone else is doing the same thing. Probably complaining about it just as much. The symmetry is unsettling. Someone mutters that the enemy doesn't deserve to eat better than this. You reply that no one deserves this, and immediately regret how honest that sounded. Joke number 2 tries to patch it. You add that suffering builds character. And everyone here is practically overflowing with it. That lands better. As the pot empties, you catch yourself wondering if the enemy cook is also scraping the bottom. Also calculating portions. Also pretending not to notice who eats slower. Historians still debate whether recognizing shared hardship made combat harder or easier. You don't know. You only know it makes the war feel smaller and sadder than it did before. You clean up in silence. The thought lingering like steam. The enemy eats. You feed your own. Somewhere between those two facts is the truth of this war, messy, human, and impossible to season into something simple. You sit back against the trench wall, listening to the distant guns, and decide not to think about it anymore. Some thoughts don't help you cook tomorrow. And tomorrow always comes. You start to notice the sickness before anyone names it. A man who lingers near the latrine too long. Another who pushes his bowl away after 2 spoonfuls. Face pale. Eyes unfocused. Someone jokes about a bad stomach. But the joke doesn't travel far. In the trenches, illness announces itself quietly, then spreads with confidence. The kitchen, inconveniently, sits at the center of it all. Food passes through you before it passes through them. And that knowledge settles heavy on your shoulders. You wash your hands more than feels reasonable. Scrubbing with cold water and whatever passes for soap. Cleanliness here is more intention than outcome. But intention still counts. Historians still debate how much trench disease could have been prevented with better sanitation. You suspect the answer is some, which is both comforting and maddening. The big historical reality is unavoidable. More soldiers were incapacitated by disease during the war than by enemy fire. Especially in the early years. Dysentery alone could tear through a unit, leaving men weak, dehydrated, useless for days or weeks. The lesser-known truth is how often cooks were blamed when sickness appeared. Regardless of cause, you feel eyes on you now. Not accusatory, just anxious. Hunger you can forgive. Illness feels personal. You thin the soup more than usual today, hoping it'll be easier on stomachs. You boil the water longer, just in case. You discard a batch that smells wrong, even though it hurts to waste it. Someone asks why. You say the soup failed inspection. Joke number 1, soft and defensive. No one laughs, but no one argues either. As you serve, You adjust portions again, favoring those who look weakest. You tell yourself it's practical. You tell yourself it's fair. You don't tell yourself you're scared. A man asks if the food is safe. You meet his eyes and say yes. Joke number 2 follows immediately. You add that it's safer than the water yesterday. That earns a thin smile. Trust restored. Barely. The trench smells worse today. Not just mud and smoke, but sickness, a sour, human edge that lingers. You breathe through your mouth and keep working. Historians still debate how soldiers endured conditions that would shut down any modern workplace. You think endurance is the wrong word. It's more like negotiation, moment by moment, with discomfort you can't escape. By afternoon, a few men are sent back. Walking slowly, heads down, you watch them go, wondering if they'll be back tomorrow or gone longer. You redistribute their uneaten portions without comment. Waste is still unacceptable. Silence is still the price. You clean everything again, hands raw now, knuckles stinging. You remind yourself that this matters, even if it doesn't show. Preventing illness is invisible work. No medals, no stories. Historians still argue about which contributions truly changed outcomes. Standing here, guarding a pot like it's a border, you decide this one counts. When you finally sit down, exhaustion hits harder than usual. Not the clean tiredness of labor, but the draining kind that comes from worry. You sip warm water and listen to the trench breathe. Tomorrow, you'll cook again, and with luck, fewer men will get sick. In this war, that's as close to victory as you're allowed to hope for. At some point, the recipes stop mattering. Not officially, no one announces it, but you feel the shift all the same. You reach for ingredients without thinking about what they're supposed to become. You cook by weight, smell, and sound. The way the pot answers the spoon. The way steam rises or doesn't. This is instinct now, honed by repetition and necessity. You don't remember the last time you followed instructions. The army manual might as well be a book of fairy tales. Conditions change too fast. Supplies arrive wrong or not at all. Fires burn unevenly, so you adapt. You thicken with bread when there's no flour. You thin with water when there's no choice. You learn that timing matters more than precision. Too early and the food tastes flat. Too late and it burns. And then nothing can save it. This is one of those quiet transformations historians rarely track. At some point, soldiers stopped relying on formal training and began relying on each other. On intuition built under pressure. Trench cooks were no different. A lesser-known truth is that many of them became better cooks during the war, not more refined, but more resilient. They learned how to feed people with almost nothing, under conditions designed to make that impossible. You test the stew with the tip of the spoon, nod once, and keep going. Someone asks what it's called. You say it doesn't have a name yet. Joke number 1. He suggests survival. You say that name's already taken. Joke number 2. The exchange feels light, easy, and you realize that ease is part of your method now too. Calm cooks make calmer trenches. As you serve, you adjust instinctively. You don't measure anymore. You sense when the pot needs to last longer. You sense when men need a little more warmth than fairness would allow. Historians still debate whether such improvisation meaningfully affected unit morale. Watching shoulders relax as bowls fill. You'd argue it did, even if no one wrote it down. You eat last. As always, the taste is unremarkable. That's the point. Unremarkable means acceptable. Acceptable means no complaints, no illness, no extra problems added to an already full list. You chew slowly, appreciating the absence of disaster more than any hint of flavor. As evening settles, you clean up with movements so practiced they feel borrowed from someone else. You realize you could do this in the dark now. Maybe you already have. The trench hums softly, voices, distant guns, the constant, low presence of being underground. You sit back and feel a strange, muted pride. Historians still argue about what skills soldiers carried home from the war. Marksmanship, discipline, endurance. You think some carried something quieter, the ability to make something workable out of chaos. You lean your head against the trench wall, eyes half closed, already planning tomorrow's meal without consciously deciding to. Instinct has taken over. And for now, that's enough to keep everyone going. There are stories that never make it into official histories. Not because they're secret, but because they're inconvenient. They don't fit the clean lines of strategy maps or the heroic arcs people prefer. You hear those stories here, in fragments, usually while stirring something that barely qualifies as food. This is where the quieter truths collect. Someone mentions, casually, that the bread you've been serving isn't technically bread. Not anymore. It's a composite, flour stretched with whatever was available at the time. Sometimes ground beans, sometimes things no one wants to name. You already knew that, of course. You just hadn't put words to it. A lesser-known fact is that wartime bread often barely met peacetime definitions. Engineered to fill stomachs rather than satisfy laws. Historians still debate how widespread these substitutions were. You know they were common enough that no one's surprised. You think about how many myths survive because they're comforting. The idea that soldiers were always well-fed. The idea that someone, somewhere, had a firm handle on logistics. From where you stand, the war runs on improvisation and optimism in roughly equal measure. When either runs out, things get ugly fast. As you cook, someone tells a story about a different unit. Farther up the line, where the cook disappeared for 2 days. When he came back, he'd somehow acquired real eggs. No one asked how. The eggs were eaten reverently. Like communion, historians still argue about black markets at the front, how extensive they were. Who benefited? You don't need the debate. You've seen the results, small miracles. Briefly enjoyed. You joke that you're taking notes. Joke number 1. Someone replies that you'd better learn how to run faster. Joke number 2. The laughter that follows is cautious but real. Even ambition feels dangerous here. You serve dinner and notice how people talk differently now. Less about battles, more about logistics, about how things actually work. Who knows someone in supply? Who can trade favors? The war underneath the war. You realize that surviving here isn't just about bravery. It's about networks, about quiet cooperation, about knowing who to ask without asking too loudly. Historians still debate whether these informal systems undermined or supported the war effort. Watching men eat food that exists only because someone bent a rule. You suspect they supported it more than anyone wants to admit. Armies run on regulations. Soldiers survive on exceptions. You eat your portion slowly. Mind busy. It occurs to you that this role, this trench cook existence, has given you access to a version of the wharf you see. You're not at the center of decisions, but you're at the center of consequences. You see what happens when plans meet reality, when calories meet bodies, when optimism meets mud. As night settles, you clean the pot and set it aside, fingers moving automatically. You feel tired in a different way tonight. Not just physically, but mentally, like you've been holding too many half-truths at once. Historians still argue about what the real experience of the Great War was. Standing here, hands smelling faintly of soup and smoke, you think the real experience is this: messy, compromised, and rarely written down. You lean back against the trench wall and close your eyes. Tomorrow, you'll cook again, and more untold stories will gather around the pot, waiting their turn to be stirred. You hear the phrase drift through the trench like a challenge. The historians will argue about this. It's usually said with a shrug, sometimes with a laugh, always with the quiet understanding that whatever the argument is, it won't include you by name. Still, the idea sticks. You stir the pot and wonder what exactly they'll argue about when it comes to food like this. Some will say the rations were sufficient. On paper, they were. Calories added up, protein accounted for, charts tidy and convincing. Others will say the rations were barely adequate, that men survived despite them, not because of them. You've lived somewhere between those footnotes. The stew in front of you doesn't care which side wins the debate. It just needs to be hot. A lesser-known detail surfaces in your mind. Early nutritional science was still clumsy during the war. Vitamins weren't fully understood. Fresh produce was treated as optional. Scurvy and deficiency crept in quietly, disguised as fatigue or low morale. Historians still debate how much this invisible malnutrition weakened armies over time. You look at the pot and think, if this is science, it's a rough draft. Someone nearby scoffs at a rumor that the generals eat well. You don't correct him. It's probably true, and also irrelevant. Comparing meals up the chain only sharpens resentment. You joke instead, number one for this stretch, that at least your kitchen doesn't require reservations. A few tired smiles appear. That's enough. You serve dinner with the same practiced rhythm, noticing how debate lives differently here. It's not loud. It doesn't demand answers. It mutters, chews, swallows. Men argue with their spoons, with their appetites, with their own expectations. Someone says the food used to be better. Someone else says everything used to be better. Joke number 2. You suggest nostalgia is a seasoning you've run out of. That one lands. As the bowl's empty, you consider what historians won't feel, the weight of deciding whether to add more water. The guilt of stretching food. The relief when no one gets sick afterward. These decisions never make it into archives. They exist only in outcomes. In who stays standing and who doesn't. You eat last, leaning against the trench wall, and try to imagine someone reading about this years from now. Numbers, policies, conclusions. You smile faintly at the idea that a debate could capture the texture of hunger or the sound of a spoon scraping a pot. Joke number 3. Internal and dry. Good luck with that. Night settles in, and the trench quiets to its familiar murmur. Somewhere, someone is writing a report. Somewhere else, someone is writing a memory they'll never share. You rinse the pot and set it aside, satisfied that whatever the historians decide, Tonight the line was fed. And that, here, is the only argument that matters. The laughter surprises you when it happens. Not because it's loud, it isn't, but because it's genuine. It slips out near the pot. Unplanned. The kind that catches its owner off guard. Someone drops a spoon. It clatters. And another man salutes it solemnly as a fallen comrade. The trench pauses. Then a few chuckles ripple through. For a moment, the war loosens its grip. You've learned to recognize these moments as rare weather patterns. They don't last long, but they change the air while they're here. Humor in the trenches isn't about wit. It's about relief. A pressure valve opening just enough to keep everything from bursting. Historians still debate whether humor was a form of denial or resilience. Watching men grin over a dented spoon. You think it's both, and neither explanation feels complete. You play your part carefully. Joke number 1 slips out when you announce that today's stew has been approved by absolutely no one. Someone asks for the inspector. You gesture vaguely at the pot. Laughter again, soft and brief. It warms the space more effectively than the fire. The big historical picture rolls on, weeks of stalemate. Losses measured in yards and names. What doesn't make the summaries is how jokes acted like glue. They held people together when logic failed. A lesser-known detail is that units known for frequent humor often reported lower desertion rates. Though no one ever quite agreed why. You suspect it's because laughter reminds you that you're still a person. Not just a position. As you serve, the jokes continue. Small and domestic. Someone claims the stew is getting better with age. You reply that it's gaining experience. Joke number 2. Another man says he'd rate it 3 stars. You ask out of how many? He says 5, then adds that he's feeling generous. Joke number 3. The exchange feels almost normal. Which is the most dangerous word here and also the most precious? You notice how posture changes when people laugh. Shoulders drop. Breathing slows. Hands steady. It's subtle, but it's there. You think about how little effort it took. Just a comment. A shared understanding, and how large the effect feels. Historians still argue about morale as if it's a measurable substance. You think it's more like steam, invisible until it escapes. When the pot runs low, the laughter thins with it, drifting back to posts and duties. You clean up slowly, letting the moment fade naturally. Forcing cheer is worse than none at all. You know that now. You sit back against the trench wall, the echo of chuckles still in your ears, and allow yourself a small smile. Not because things are good, because for a few minutes, they were lighter, in a place built to grind people down. That feels like a quiet act of resistance. You know something is wrong before anyone says it out loud. The supply route is quiet for too long. No crates scraping along the trench floor. No muffled curses from men hauling weight they weren't meant to carry. Just absence. And absence, out here, is never neutral. When the word finally comes, it's delivered casually, as if pretending this is normal might make it so. The supply run didn't make it through. Shelling, mud, a road that no longer exists in any useful sense. Try again tomorrow. You nod, because nodding is easier than asking questions that don't have answers. Inside, you're already recalculating everything. This is one of those moments the official histories compress into a single sentence. Supply lines were disrupted. What that really means is you open the ration box and see the bottom sooner than expected. You count tins twice, hoping your eyes are wrong. They aren't. Historians still debate how often frontline units faced near total supply failures. Standing here, staring into a half-empty crate, you decide often enough is precise enough. You don't announce it. Panic is contagious, and you're not in the business of spreading it. You cook quietly, stretching what you have with water, with bread, with silence. The stew grows thinner by the minute. But it's still warm, and warmth is currency. Someone asks if this is a new recipe. Joke number 1 slips out automatically. You say it's a minimalist phase. A few tired smiles appear. Good, that buys you time. As you serve, you make decisions that feel heavier than usual. Smaller portions now might mean no food later. Or it might mean just enough for everyone. You aim for the middle. The place you always aim and never quite trust. A lesser-known truth is that trench cooks often bore the brunt of these choices alone. Officers saw numbers. You saw faces. Someone notices the stew is thinner. You shrug and say it's soup. Not a contract. Joke number 2. He nods, accepting it because there's nothing else to do. Acceptance spreads faster than complaint when options disappear. You skip your own portion entirely. No one comments. They rarely do. Hunger sharpens, but you push it aside, focusing on the mechanics. Ladle, bowl, nod, repeat. Historians still argue about altruism versus duty in wartime behavior. You're not sure which this is. You only know the line needs to eat. By the time the pot is empty, the trench feels quieter than usual. Not angry, just aware. You clean up slowly, conserving water, conserving energy, conserving thoughts. Tomorrow's food now depends on things far beyond your control: roads, weather, luck. You sit back against the trench wall, stomach hollow, mind busy. Supply failures don't make for dramatic stories. No explosions, no charges. Just a creeping strain that tests everyone differently. Historians still debate which moments truly broke morale. You suspect days like this did more damage than anyone likes to admit. You close your eyes and breathe, already planning contingencies that may never be needed. Tomorrow, you'll cook again, somehow. The miracle arrives in a form so modest you almost miss it. A crate, just one, mud-streaked, dented, dragged into the trench with more effort than ceremony. It doesn't sparkle, it doesn't promise abundance, but it exists. And after yesterday, existence feels generous. You help pry it open, fingers stiff. Heart doing something unprofessional in your chest. Inside, bread, darker than usual but real. A few tins you recognize. And, this is the part that changes everything, something warmable. Something meant to be eaten hot. Not endured. The timing is cruelly perfect. Hunger has sharpened everyone's edges. This crate smooths them just enough. This is one of those quiet historical moments that never earns a date. No record will say a single crate arrived and kept a line standing. But that's exactly what happens more often than anyone admits. Historians still debate whether small resupplies mattered compared to large offensives. Standing here, counting loaves, you'd argue they mattered more to the people who had to wake up tomorrow. You work fast, aware that expectation is rising. You light the stove, coaxing it into cooperation, and start assembling something that feels deliberate. The smell spreads, richer than yesterday's thin offerings. and heads turn almost in unison. Someone mutters, "Now that's more like it." You reply that miracles are seasonal. Joke number 1. It lands harder than you expect. As the food heats, you feel the trench change. Not dramatically, no cheering, but subtly. Posture straightens. Conversations resume. Hunger loosens its grip. A lesser-known truth is that relief can be as exhausting as deprivation, when the tension releases. People feel it all at once. You steady yourself and keep stirring. You serve carefully, making sure everyone gets something hot. Portions are still modest, but the warmth does most of the work. You watch faces as bowls are lifted. Steam fogging tired eyes. Someone sighs audibly. Someone else closes his eyes for a second too long. You pretend not to notice, giving them that privacy. Joke number 2 slips out when someone asks if there's more coming tomorrow. You say you're negotiating with destiny. A few smiles. Enough. Humor here is less about promises and more about permission to feel okay for a minute. You finally take a portion for yourself. It's not a feast, but it's hot, and it has weight, and it reminds you what enough feels like. You eat slowly, savoring the absence of ache in your stomach more than the taste. Historians still argue about what sustained soldiers through the long war. You think it was moments like this, small rescues, barely noticed by the world, but enormous in context. When the pot empties, the trench settles into a quieter, steadier rhythm. You clean up, hands calmer now, thoughts less frantic. Tomorrow is still uncertain, nothing has been solved, but tonight, you bought everyone a little strength. You sit back against the trench wall, warmth spreading slowly through your core, and let yourself rest in that. In a war of shortages, sometimes a single crate is enough to save a day. The strangest comparisons sneak up on you when you're least prepared for them. You're scrubbing a pot with cold water and a stubborn bit of grit. And suddenly you're thinking about kitchens that haven't existed for you in years. Bright ones, clean ones, places where food comes wrapped in choice instead of obligation. You don't chase the thought, it arrives on its own and settles in like it belongs. You imagine a modern kitchen without fully understanding what modern even means anymore. A flat surface that stays flat. A flame that appears when you ask it to. Water that runs clear without negotiation. It feels absurdly luxurious, like imagining living inside a postcard. Historians still debate how the war accelerated changes in domestic life after it ended. Standing here, elbows deep in grime, you realize how violently this place has reset your standards. You catch yourself thinking that if someone dropped you into a future kitchen right now, you'd be suspicious, too quiet, too controlled. You'd probably listen for shellfire that isn't there. Joke number 1 slips into your own head. You picture yourself ducking every time a kettle whistles. You almost smile. The trench kitchen, if it can be called that, has taught you lessons no cooking school ever would. Efficiency without comfort, creativity without reward. You've learned to cook without relying on freshness, on equipment, on certainty. You've learned that good enough can be a life-saving target. A lesser-known truth is that many veterans later struggled with abundance, not because they lacked gratitude, but because too many choices felt wrong after years of none. Someone nearby complains that the pot is dented. You tell him it adds character. Joke number 2. He taps it thoughtfully and agrees. You think about how future kitchens polish away all signs of use. How they hide the labor that happens inside them. Here, every scratch tells a story. None of them are optional. As you prepare the next meal, you move with the ease of someone who knows exactly what can go wrong. You don't overfill. You don't rush heat. You don't trust silence. These habits feel permanent now. Historians still debate which trench adaptations carried over into civilian life. You suspect this one did. An alertness that never fully turns off. You eat your portion standing, as always, and imagine sitting at a table again someday. Sitting without needing to get up quickly. Sitting without watching the sky. The image feels distant but not impossible. That's new. Maybe the idea of comfort hasn't died, just gone quiet. You clean up and lean back against the trench wall, letting the present settle. The war hasn't changed, but you have. Kitchens will never just be kitchens again. They'll always be places where safety is measured, where waste feels sinful, where warmth is never taken lightly. Historians still argue about how the Great War reshaped everyday life. You think part of the answer lives here? In the way a simple pot can redefine what enough means forever. You don't notice the habits forming until they've already set like plaster. You catch yourself saving crumbs without thinking, folding bits of bread into pockets you don't remember having. You rinse the pot and automatically pour the last warm water over your hands, letting nothing go to waste. These movements feel older than you are now, as if you arrived with them. The war teaches by repetition, not instruction. You learn to wake before you're called. You learn to eat without distraction. You learn to stand while resting and rest while standing. Most of all, you learn to plan 3 steps ahead without expecting any of those steps to survive contact with reality. Historians still debate which wartime behaviors followed soldiers home. Watching yourself operate on pure reflex. You're certain this one does. Someone asks what you'll do when this is over. It's a dangerous question, asked lightly. You reply that you'll never complain about a meal again. Joke number 1. It lands, but there's truth under it that makes the laughter fade faster than usual. Another man says he'll open a restaurant. You tell him you'll be his quality control. Joke number 2. That one feels safer. You realize you've become efficient in ways that have nothing to do with speed. You can look at a group of men and know how much food will calm them. You can tell from a pot's smell whether it will comfort or disappoint. You know when to speak and when to let silence do the work. A lesser-known truth is that many trench cooks carried these instincts into civilian jobs, excelling quietly because chaos had trained them better than order ever could. As you serve dinner, you watch the familiar choreography unfold. Bowls out, ladle in, nod, move on. It's muscle memory now. You could do this half asleep. And sometimes you do. Historians still argue about whether repetition dulled soldiers or preserved them. From where you stand, it did both. It numbed the sharpest edges while keeping the core intact. You eat last. As always, the food tastes fine. That's become your benchmark. Fine means no one complained. Fine means no one got sick. Fine means the night will be manageable. You think about how odd it will feel someday to eat just because you want to. Not because the clock or the line demands it. As darkness settles, you clean up one more time. Hands moving without instruction. You lean back against the trench wall and feel the habits humming under your skin. ready to surface at the smallest cue. Even if the war ends tomorrow. These habits won't. They've been earned too thoroughly. Historians still debate what soldiers carried home that couldn't be seen. You suspect it was this, an invisible kit of instincts, shaped by hunger and responsibility, that never quite gets unpacked. You close your eyes, letting the trench fade slightly, knowing that whoever you are after this, you'll always be someone who knows how to feed others when it matters. A day doesn't really end here. It just thins out. Tasks taper off until what's left feels like an afterimage, scraps of sound. Leftover warmth in the pot. The echo of footsteps fading down the trench. You call it the end of a cooking day because you need the label. Not because anything actually stops. You scrub the last pot longer than necessary. It gives your hands something to do while your mind catches up. The water is cold. The metal bites back. You welcome both. When you finally set the pot aside, it feels like putting a period at the end of a sentence that never quite makes sense. Tomorrow's menu is already forming in your head, even though you tell yourself you'll think about it later. Later doesn't exist the way it used to. This is the part no one photographs. No steam, no gathering crowd, no jokes hovering near the ladle. Just cleanup, just you, alone with the quiet consequences of the day. Historians still debate whether the trench experience was defined more by action or by waiting. Standing here, hands raw and tired, you decide waiting wins by sheer volume. Someone passes and thanks you. Awkwardly, as if unsure whether thanks apply to food. You shrug it off, but it lands anyway. Gratitude here is rare not because people don't feel it, but because expressing it feels risky. It makes things feel final. You joke, number one for the night, that you accept thanks in the form of fewer complaints tomorrow. He smiles and moves on. You inventory what's left by feel as much as sight. Bread, enough. Tins, barely. Fuel, manageable if the wind behaves. Water, always the question mark. You make mental notes you won't write down. Writing things down tempts fate. A lesser-known truth is that many trench routines stayed oral on purpose. Paper felt too permanent for a world that changed hourly. The guns mutter distantly, uninterested in your accounting. The trench breathes, a low, constant sound you've stopped questioning. You sit back against the wall and let the fatigue spread properly now that the work is done. It's a heavy tired, earned and uncomplicated. You don't fight it. Historians still argue about how soldiers marked the end of a day without clear boundaries. You think it happened like this, when the pot cooled, when the last utensil was stacked, when your hands finally stilled. That was the signal, not peace, just pause. You close your eyes and let the pause hold you. Tomorrow will come whether you're ready or not. For now, the line is fed, the kitchen is quiet, and the day, such as it is, has been finished. You don't leave the trench so much as you detach from it. The order comes quietly, passed along like a favor rather than a command. Rotation, rest, a word that feels exaggerated, almost fictional. Someone else will take over the stove. Someone else will argue with the fire. Count tins. Guard the water. You nod as if this is normal. As if you haven't built your entire sense of usefulness around that pot. Packing takes less time than you expect. You don't own much. A cup. A spoon with a slight bend that fits your hand just right. You hesitate, then slip it into your pocket. Habit. Already, around you, the trench looks exactly the same as it did yesterday. Mud unchanged, walls slumped, smells layered and familiar. It's unsettling how little the place seems to care that you're leaving it. As you move down the line, men nod to you. A few say goodbye. Most don't, not out of indifference, but because goodbyes feel too much like endings. You joke, number one, that you're off to find a kitchen with fewer rats. Someone calls after you that the rats will miss you. Joke number two, and it lands softer than usual. This is one of those historical moments that barely registers in records. Men rotated in and out constantly. Positions changed hands. Roles shifted. Historians still debate how rotation affected combat effectiveness and morale. Walking away from the kitchen, you feel both lighter and oddly hollow. Responsibility had weight. Without it, you're not sure where to put your hands. You pass areas you've only heard about, dugouts, junctions, a stretch of trench that smells slightly less bad than the rest. Each step takes you farther from the rhythms you've internalized. No stove to check, no pot to stir, no line of bowls waiting. The absence is louder than you expected. You stop once, turn back, and look, just a glance. You don't wave. The trench swallows the view quickly, bending, hiding itself. It's strange how something that felt endless can disappear so fast. Historians still argue about whether soldiers felt relief or guilt when leaving the front line. You feel both, layered like everything else here. As you continue on, your thoughts drift to the meals you cooked, the faces you fed. You wonder if the next cook will do things differently. Better, maybe. Worse, maybe. It doesn't matter. The line will eat. The war will continue. You did your part in the only way you could. By the time you reach the rear area, the sounds have changed. Fewer shells, more voices. You sit down heavily, suddenly aware of how tired you are in places no rest can reach. You close your eyes, hand resting on the spoon in your pocket, and let the distance grow. Tomorrow, you won't cook, and that, more than anything, tells you how deep the trench got under your skin. The quiet feels wrong at first. Not peaceful, just unfamiliar. There's no constant tremor underfoot. No urgent reason to listen for whistles or count tins in your head. You sit where you've been told to sit, wrapped in a stillness that doesn't ask anything of you. And your body doesn't quite know what to do with that. You keep expecting someone to ask when the food will be ready. Your hands rest in your lap, empty. They twitch once, as if reaching for a ladle that isn't there. You let them. Muscle memory needs time to unwind. Around you, other men do the same small, pointless movements. Checking gear that doesn't need checking. Scanning horizons that aren't hostile. Historians still debate how soldiers adjusted to rest periods. You suspect adjusted is too strong a word. Mostly, people just waited until the noise inside them softened. You think back through the days, not in order, but by sensation, the weight of the pot, the sting of cold water on cracked skin, steam fogging your vision, the smell of soup mixed with smoke and something metallic you never learned to name. These memories don't arrive dramatically. They drift, slow and gentle, like they're tired too. A lesser-known truth is that many trench cooks remembered the war not in battles, but in meals. Who ate quickly? Who lingered? Who thanked you without words? Historians still argue about what roles mattered most in keeping armies going. Sitting here now, Stomach full. Body safe for the moment. You feel the answer settle quietly, the ones that kept people human. You realize something else, softer and harder to admit. You miss the kitchen, not the conditions, not the hunger or the fear. You miss the purpose, the simple clarity of knowing that if you fed the line, you had done enough for one day. Civilian life, whenever it comes back to you, will not be that clean. Your breathing slows. The tension you've carried so long doesn't vanish, it loosens. Little by little, the images blur at the edges. The trench fades into a general darkness, then into warmth, then into something closer to rest. You're not cooking now. You're not counting. You're just here. Let your shoulders drop. Let the pot cool in your mind. Let the smells thin and drift away. The war can wait outside this moment. You've earned this quiet. Your thoughts slow, stretch, and soften, like embers settling after a long burn. Nothing needs you right now. Nothing is expected. You can rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.